All right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Stage 2 Bass Pro Tour from Lake Travis in Austin, Texas. It is a long, winding, skinny little river system with a river called the Colorado River, just a little river. It is quite the interesting lake. S-turns, a lot of bluff walls. I mean, literally like houses are on bluffs and they got to take elevators to get down to their docks. It's a pretty interesting place. One of the things that's making Lake Travis different, I think, than in years past, and I've only been there one time before, is the amount of zebra mussels that are in the lake. They have absolutely infested it. Every dock, every rock, anything that a zebra mussel can grow on, they are growing on. So it's making the water even clearer. So you get that mid-lake down to the dam. I mean, on bright, sunny, calm days, you can probably see 20 feet, maybe more. It's really, really clear water. And it's such an interesting place because they're either this big or they're that big. There's not a lot of like those 2, 3, 4 pound fish. I mean, there's a few of them. There's a shit pot full of 1 pound to 1 pound 7 ounces. But then you see these tanks up there, these 6, 7, 8, 9s. So one of the twists that we put in play for this Bass Pro Tour event in stage 2 is we made the minimum weight of the fish. We lowered it to 1 pound 8 ounces, just so that we were able to have some catchable fish. So we, even at 1 pound 8 ounces, we're above the state limit, what's considered a keeper. So we kind of put the bar a little bit higher. My mindset going into this tournament was swim bait, big bait, and finesse. I also, in my head, last time I was there, I caught a few big ones throwing a swim bait. All right, 1, I want to catch big ones. 2, I need to catch a big one to keep myself qualified for heavy hitters for next season. 3 is the more big ones you catch, the quicker you can skyrocket up the scoreboard. So day 1 of practice, I want to find stained water further upriver, at least, get maybe like 3/4 of the way up the lake on up. And just because those fish would be less spooky, easier, hopefully they bite better, or they do everything that you want them to do in the dirty water versus that clear water, especially if it's sunny bluebird skies. So day 1, I run up and I start, and I'm just running pockets, thinking, okay, little secondary pockets, main lake stuff, instead of the big creeks, and I roll in and I catch a big one on a bladed jig, like I said, maybe a 7-pounder. I'm like, and the thing is, I come up out of a bush and I watch this fish just come out of like 8 foot of water and eat the bait. And I got maybe 2 feet of line left. I'm like, I hate catching big ones in practice. I love catching big ones, but you don't want to catch them in practice. That's like, oh no, save them for derby time. So I start working my way up the lake, and I'm trying to fish some steep stuff, some shallow stuff. I go into a little wind-blown pocket, super shallow stuff. I pick up a bladed jig, dunk, 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 dunk. I mean, just like bite after bite after bite after bite. But I don't think maybe but 1 or 2 of them were going to be 1/8 or more. I'm like, those are a bunch of knotheads. I go into another pocket, shallow stuff. And I'm thinking, all right, some of these post-spawn fish should be on these shallow points, or there may be some bluegill bed stuff around. And I see one up, in about this deep of water. I think I was throwing a swim bait that time. He turned and looked at my bait, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like an 8, 9 pounder. I mean, it was big. So I'm thinking, okay, they're on these shallow secondary points and creeks. So I start running some of that. Maybe I was throwing some top water, and I had a couple bites, but it's like, it didn't turn out to be what I thought it was going to be. So I go further upriver, trying to get way up there. So did half the other field. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna get way up the river, there's gonna be less boats. It was just the opposite. I think literally half the field was within a 10, 15 mile section of river, it seemed like that day, because I couldn't get on anything. There's boat. One boat pulls off, another boat pulls on. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I lost confidence because there's so many guys fishing up there. And I seemed like when further I got up there, the fewer the bites I had. I kind of pulled the plug upriver. I never got out on anything great, but I mean, I was definitely getting a bite here, a bite there. It's like, all right, no, you know, just if you get a couple good chasers coming out of the dock, all right, so you mark that dock, you know, I can come back, you know, if it doesn't eat a big bait, then I can, you know, skip a general under there or throw a Ned rig around, I'm gonna catch these fish. So I got off the water after day one, and it was like a 13-hour day on the water. And I wasn't discouraged, but I wasn't excited either. I was like, all right, had a few decent bites, you know, had a few here and there, but I just never felt like it was dialed in. All right, so day two, I'm going to fish the lower half of the lake, the clear water. It seemed like everywhere I went, I was getting bites. I was like, huh, all right, I'm seeing some fish swim around, I'm seeing some bedfish. There seemed to be more life going on down the lower lake, and I'm like, huh. Started seeing some schoolers, because you know, the last time we were there, I remember in the marinas, you go in the marinas, the fish would be schooling, and I think it was on the second morning of practice, I started in the marina. Sure enough, there's some fish come up, boom, 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 you know, and I threw out there, and I caught one or two keepers out of them. I was like, all right. Then I go to the bank behind the marina, and there's bedfish, you know, and then some post-spawn fish swimming around. And I'm like, all right, that's good to see. So I just started, I was running the same deal. I was running docks, I was running shallow flats, looking for different things. It seemed like everywhere you went, or everywhere I went, I'd still get a bite. And whether it was back in a creek, main lake pocket, but the one thing I noticed that was consistent every time I picked it up was throwing a little bait called the cash out. It's a Ned style bait I designed for Berkeley. It's power bait, but I pick up that little cash out and pitch it out there, and I had it on 16th ounce head. Donk, 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 donk. And you get a bunch of little knot heads, but I was catching some 2-pounders too. I'm like, all right. It seemed like the more vertical the rock and the shelf rock, the better it was. And I go down there and I could see them spawning in 5 to 10 foot of water. Plus there's post-spawn fish, and they're just, you know, just swimming on these bluffs. But that vertical shelf rock seemed to be where you got bit. So it's like every time I pull up the little channel swing bluff and throw the net out there, donk, donk, donk. I'm like, okay, this is way too easy. I go to another marina and I'm gonna go look for schoolers. I'm like, well, let me go back behind this marina. Kind of like I did that other marina. I saw some fish. And I go down, I'm like, oh gosh, bed. And this is main lake. And I see one down there in about 10 foot of water. I'm like, that's a big one down there. I'm thinking it's probably I don't know, maybe a 6 to 12 pound range. I don't know, it's hard to tell. When a fish is down that deep, you're looking down there and you just see this big shamu, like, wow, that's a big one. And so I went beep beep on the Lawrence and kept going. I was like, so I pick up a Ned rig, and as I'm looking, I throw it out there. I catch like a 4.5 pounder. Like, okay, well, you can't catch a big one on the cash out. In the back of my head, if I go fish some channel swings, some bluff rock with the cash out, I'm gonna catch them. Still wanting that big bite, because I know there's plenty of big ones in Lake Travis, and they caught a, you know, the lake record was caught this year. Young kid, I think it's like 15.5 pounds. And I actually met the kid and he talked about it. He found it as a bedfish. He thought he called his grandpa and he said, Grandpa, I found one on bed. I think it's like 6 to 8 pounds. And he calls grandpa an hour later. He goes, Grandpa, it's 15 something. I'm like, that was a hell of a bedfish. So can you imagine sitting there just like watching that fish go donk? Oh, Betsy. So I'm still looking for the swim bait bite, trying to catch one of those, you know, get something I can figure out to go catch those 5 to 10 pound fish and get myself over the hump. So I had confidence in throwing a big bait and a Ned rig. So trying to figure out my game plan. Do I go fish, you know, mid-lake, shallow stuff, stay in the bluff stuff, fishing docks? What am I gonna do? All right, day one is here. Bass Pro Tour, Lake Travis in Austin, Texas. I'm excited. I have no idea what's gonna happen. I just know that I gotta go catch them. And it's so interesting, the Bass Pro Tour. You know, this season I'm fishing the Tackle Warehouse Pro Circuit and I'm fishing the Bass Pro Tour. 5 fish limit, you know, then you got 1.5 or 2 pound limit and above. And 5 fish limit is so much easier. It's so much less stressful. Bass Pro Tour, I love it because it is such a challenge. You have to catch them, not just 2-pounders, but you got to catch 4s and 7s or 9s or whatever you got to catch. You got to catch big ones. You got to catch a lot of fish to be able to win on the Bass Pro Tour. I'm excited because I'm going on to a lake, Lake Travis, that I know has big ones. I know that the way I like to fish, if it sets up right and I can make it happen. So I get out there, I'm excited, boom, and I get to the first spot. I pull into a marina where I saw some fish schooling, and I got a little bit of wind blowing out there, so there's no schooling action outside the marina where I saw them. So I roll in the marina. I saw one fish bust, and I throw a bladed jig over there with a deal on it, and I catch it, and I'm thinking it's like a 1-4.
Okay, so look, somebody broke him off. He's got a lure in his mouth.
I weigh it's like a 1.9 or 1.10, whatever it was. I'm like, I caught a keeper. It's like, all right. It's like I wasn't sure what a 1.8 looked like, and so I started moving around. And you get bumps, little shorts, nothing. I'm like, man, this is really not happening. I'm like, well, let me run further up the lake, a couple pockets where I had some bites and where I saw that big one, you know, up in the shallow point, is like in the back of my head. So I get up into this creek and I want to fish at the mouth, and there's one dock there and Gerald Spore's there. I'm like, oh, ah. So I go back in a little bit, I'm fishing. I get to the point where that big one was. I'm like all nervous, I'm all excited. I'm like, okay, maybe, you know, I'm thinking maybe it's a big resident female eating bluegill around there, and I fished all around, nada. And then I look over to my right, and Greg Vincent's right there, right behind the dock. I didn't see him, so I don't know if he had already fished through there, but I know he didn't catch a giant one in there. So I'm like, oh wow, so I'm gonna be sharing, you know, splitting water with guys on this stuff. So I roll over there and I start running some waypoints where I had bites and keeper fish, and nothing. And then I get lined up on these series of docks, and the wind's blowing right on them. Oh, man, it's perfect. Man, I skip a swim bait, I'm right, boom. So I pick up the Ned rig, throw it in the dock. I'm like, that's a good one. Ding. Zebra mussels, bye-bye, peace out. There's this whole, I mean, there's maybe 2 miles of the shoreline with docks on it that I had not fished. But the wind's right, I'm like, let's just go fish. I fished all these docks that line up perfect. The wind's, you know, I'm thinking, gosh, the wind's pushing on them. We should get crushed down here. You got buckbrush, you got everything, stained water. This is beautiful. And nothing. I'm like, come on. Well, let me run back down to that one dock where I got a bite. And I go, get the bait up there. Finally, I catch a I think it was 314 or 315. I'm like,
It took long enough. Holy jeez.
We're back in, you know, we're on. I mean, I was in like 39th place or something like that. So I got one good bite. I got one small keeper, a 1.9 or something, whatever it was. But get on a little run here. I can get back in this. Just 3 or 4 bites, I'm back in. And I was like, what do I do? And I remember there's a creek that I fished last time I was there, and I actually checked it on the second day of practice. I was just throwing a big bait, seeing if anything follows, and I actually saw a couple 2-pounders. Let me run down to that creek, put everything away, just pick up the cash out and fish. And I go right around, there's a little bluff wall point, pitch the cash out in there, 2 something. I'm like, yeah, finally. Fish around a little bit, go to the next little point, cash out, another one. All right, go to the next point, there's another one. So just like that, in the last 45 minutes, I went from being at the bottom of the list to moving up to 19th place. I'm like, all right, so I'm inside the top 20. But I left that day, just realizing, oh, I'm gonna catch them on day 2. Day 2, I'm out there. I start in a completely different area. Start in that marina, day 2 in the morning. Very few schoolers. Chris Lane started with me right in there. We're like standing there just looking at each other, and we're talking, and it's like, well, we'll just, you know, if they're schooling, we'll just work together in here. But I didn't feel it. I mean, there was occasional fish, boom, boom, and it's post front. I mean, we had like, I don't know how many inches of rain the day before that, and the lake came up about 1.5 feet since my first day of competition, because there's so much rain. The lake was just like, so, but it was post front. I could tell that the fish were acting different. And so I said, well, let's just go fish. I had another little corner of a dock in a creek where I caught a 4-pounder, saw a couple more 4-pounders just swimming around docks, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go catch one over there. I didn't catch one there. Let's go over here. And I could start seeing these fish on these little rock walls behind the dock. I'm like, man, those, I don't know if those are keepers, but I fished around, a couple non-scorables, and I pull the dock, throw the cash out there. I catch a, solid fish, keeper. I think it's like a 112 or something like that. And I'm like, all right, well, we're in. So I found some man-made habitat with a big school of fish on it that I caught a couple, solid keepers in. You can see fish swimming around all on the active target down there, but they just would not eat. And so I said, all right, let's go to where I ended on day one. And I was like, I know there's a lot more fish in that creek that I didn't catch. So I'm like, let me just pick up the cash out and just fish. There's lots of rock bluff, and I'm like, dink, dink, dink. I thought it was just gonna be easy. I really did. I thought that the cash out was just gonna bring me a big fat check, and I was gonna make it to the knockout round, and I struggled. I mean, I go back in another creek, there's a big marina back there, the wind's kind of blowing. There's just thousands of leaves that got blown into the lake and washed in and blowing in there. I throw my swim bait, and it gets hung up on some leaves, so I go to jerk it and clear it, and as I go to jerk it, a 3-pounder comes out trying to eat it, and I just pulled it away from him. No! So I fished around a little bit, and I turn around, and I come back, and I just pick up the bladed jig with the deal on there, and I threw it in there, and just line goes slack, and I swing it in. I was back in it. It was like one fish. So I was like, all of a sudden now I get one more bite or 2 more scoreable fish. I'm going to make the knockout round. So I'm like, all of a sudden I'm on a 36 high, man. I'm like, the Lowrance Ghost is like, just ripping down the banks, and I'm back in a creek, and I'm throwing a bladed jig, and I catch one scoreable. I'm like, oh my gosh. And now I'm like, this is all I had to be doing that day, is just go find wind-blowing banks and chunk rock and back to creeks, and then maybe it was simple, and I was overthinking it that day. In the end, I ran out of time, came up short. I had, I think, 8 pounds, 15 ounces on day 2. I missed the cut by 3 pounds. Never fails. As soon as you think you got to figure it out in this sport, not the week I wanted. Jacob Wheeler, he snuck it out at the end. I thought Bobby Lane was gonna catch one more there in the last couple minutes to beat you out, but you got Bobby Lane by 2 ounces. Woo-hoo, that was tight. So hopefully you enjoyed this show. Make sure you like, subscribe, Skeet Reese Fishing. Till next time, go crack a big one.